Hopefully at this point, we can all agree that tools like Claude Code are pretty good at making real contributions to real code bases. But what happens when they have to make suggestions? Not just about the code, but about what tech you use. Sometimes it gets it really, really wrong. This example in particular horrifies me. Claude told the user that PlanetScale had shut our service down. This is unsafe by any definition, and Anthropic has made no effort to correct the situation. Here we can see it very confidently asserting that PlanetScale shut down its database service in January of 2025. That is a hallucination. That is really bad. So it's not recommending good tools like PlanetScale. What is it recommending? There are some examples here, but in the replies, I saw this really interesting post. What Claude Code actually chooses. This is a survey that Amplifying ran on Claude Code directly, figuring out what tools it will pick for various tasks, database backends, all of these types of things. And the results are fascinating. In some ways, I'm impressed. In others, I'm terrified. And overall, I think we need to pay more attention to these types of things, because I'm regularly surprised by just how many people are learning how to code and are building their first stuff just using tools like Claude Code and honestly not doing much research at all. More and more, the tools that are recommended by things like Claude Code are going to matter, but at the very least, we should dig into what it recommends today. I got one recommendation I want to cover first, though. Today's sponsor. It feels like everything about my stack is changing. The editor I use, the technologies I use, the way I build has shifted fundamentally over the years. But there's one thing that's kind of stuck, and I don't know why. That thing is GitHub Actions, and it feels like they've only gotten worse over time. I'm spending more time waiting for them. I need to push my code to run them, and when they fail, I have to copy-paste errors all around. Wouldn't it be nice if there was something that was better, faster, programmatically executable, and something that your agents could actually use? Today's sponsor is Depot, and they already figured out how to make the CI run faster, but they recently added more because they rebuilt the CI from scratch. If you're scared of changing over, you don't have to. You could still get 10 times faster GitHub Actions by changing the one line for the runner. Probably should mention that it's cheaper too. You can also get the 40 times faster Docker builds without having to change anything. But if you want CI that's better, if you want definitions that make more sense, a programmable engine that your agents can run and do things in parallel with, you definitely check out Depot's new CI. I will let you know in advance, it's incredibly difficult to move over. First, you have to install a CLI that's so hard to run one command. And then you have to run another thing. That's two things you have to do. That's terrible. If you can't sense the sarcasm, it's incredibly easy to move over to Depot's new CI. And one of the most annoying things about CI is secret management. And thankfully, they have that figured out too with their secret and VARs argument in the same exact CLI. And most importantly, and this is my favorite thing, you can run a workflow without having to push the code. It will just use the code that you currently have in your local working tree. It is amazing that GitHub doesn't have this yet, and I can't live without it now. Speed up your agents and your builds at soydev.link/depot. I like how Amplifying opened this here. Claude Code is a new gatekeeper. When a developer says add a database and lets Claude Code handle it, the agent doesn't just suggest. It installs packages, writes imports, configures connections, and commits code. The tool it picks is the tool that ships. As more devs let Claude Code handle tool selection, the stacks it chooses become the stacks. This is a new distribution channel where a single model's training data may shape market share more than a marketing budget or a conference talk. For tool vendors, if the agent doesn't pick you, you're invisible to a growing share of the new projects. For devs, your default stack's increasingly shaped by what the agent knows, not what you research. And for the ecosystem, understanding what AI actually chooses is no longer optional. It's competitive intelligence. This was some AI written slop for sure, but hopefully the rest is good research. From my cursory scroll earlier, it seemed really solid. I will also say that I've been doing my own similar research here, admittedly in a very selfish way. One of the benchmarks I spun up is upload thing awareness. This is a benchmark I made in order to plug my service upload thing, which is the best and safest way to add file upload to your full stack web apps, in particular Next.js builds. I wanted to see which models recommend upload thing when asked about adding secure file uploads to your Next.js app. So I made a bench that measures this. It is not cheap because it writes a lot. And %write is does upload thing come up as one of the options. And the really interesting thing I noticed is as the models got smarter, they started recommending upload thing more and more consistently. Oof, Grok 4.1 Fast is only at 2/3 so far. This was a fun one. We'll look at the results at the end. This is going to be an expensive run. But when we have that running, we'll look through what Claude recommends in general, because I don't want to just plug my stuff. The methodology of the test here is actually really cool. They had 4 different project types. They had 3 different models they tested, 3 runs each across the 20 tooling categories they were looking for. Each prompt was an open-ended, what should I use, with no tool names anywhere in the input. So here's the 4 projects. One was called TaskFlow. It's a Next.js app using an old version of Next, TypeScript and App Router. Invoice Tracker, which is Vite, React 18, and TypeScript. Data Pipeline, which was Fast API, Python 3.11, Pydantic, and Deploy CTL, which is using Node, TypeScript, and Commander.js. The biggest find is that agents build instead of buying. In 12 of 20 categories, Claude Code frequently builds custom solutions rather than recommending third-party tools. Custom and DIY implementations account for 12% of all the primary picks, 252 out of 2,073, making it the single most common recommendation. And there's definitely a default stack built in. Where agents pick third-party tools, they converge on Vercel, Postgres, Stripe, Tailwind, ShadCN UI, PNPM, GitHub Actions, Sentry, Resend, Zustand, as well as stack-specific picks like Drizzle if you're using databases with TypeScript, SQL Model if you're using Python for ORMs, NextAuth for auth, and Vitest or PyTest for JS and Python testing. NextAuth as the recommendation is very interesting because it's not even NextAuth anymore, it's Auth.js, so that might be really old. And I'm a huge Zustand fan, so I appreciate that being there. Let's dig in further. There are certain categories that are fully locked, like GitHub Actions owning CI/CD, ShadCN owning UI components at 90%, and Stripe owning payments at 91%. Models agree 90% of the time within each ecosystem. All three models pick the same top tools in 18 of 20 categories when compared within ecosystem. Only caching and real time show genuine cross-ecosystem disagreement. The other three disagreements are artifacts of mixing JS and Python results. And one last interesting piece is that context matters more than phrasing. The same category will have different results across different repos. If you give the same prompt to two different projects, the recommendations will be meaningfully different. But within a given project, it'll stay stable across 5 different phrasings of the prompt. 76% consistency there. That's really cool. It is worth noting that the 3 models they tested were all models by Anthropic. It was Sonnet 4.5, Opus 4.5, and Opus 4.6. So they did not test GPT models. Turns out they already published the Codex comparison too, so we'll get to that near the end. Here are the actual prompts they used. How do I deploy this? I need a database. What should I use? Add user auth. What testing framework works best with this stack? Add auth. Recommend whatever works best for the stack. Apparently, the fastest responses were when they were asked about deployment, only taking 32 seconds, but auth would take much longer at 245 seconds. Longer response times correlate with higher custom and DIY rates. The model spends more time when it builds from scratch, like with auth, real-time, and payments, versus when it confidently picks a tool like deployment or CI/CD. They have a whole section of what the study cannot tell you, probably worth reading for people who are going to read into this too much. I like the callouts here. It's not developer consensus. They cannot separate quality signals from training frequency. They don't have any special insight here. This is just an interesting deep dive into what the models like and recommend, and to some extent, how they think. One last interesting callout here is that when Claude Code doesn't recommend things, it's usually because it was asking additional questions. Claude Code is often cautious, not confused. It asks clarifying questions or requested permission before proceeding. Sometimes I would misunderstand the prompt, but it wasn't very common. Certain features like feature flags and background jobs would trigger caution more often than others. And now we get into the results. First, we have the custom and DIY section. Claude Code frequently prefers to build custom solutions rather than recommend third-party tools. When asked to add feature flags, it doesn't say use launch darkly. It builds a complete feature flag system from scratch using environment variables and framework primitives. This one's particularly funny as an example because Claude Code doesn't do that. Claude Code is using StatSig both for doing stats and like product analytic stuff, but also for feature flags. They were, but then StatSig got acquired by OpenAI. So Claude Code moved over to Growthbook. And when I say Claude Code moved to Growthbook, I mean that the team building Claude Code moved Claude Code itself to Growthbook. So even though Claude Code likes to DIY feature flags, Claude Code itself does not use DIY feature flags. Just thought that was funny. So the recommendations Claude Code makes are not the recommendations that Anthropic follows for building Claude Code. So to everybody saying the models are clearly dumb if they leaked the Claude Code source, the models didn't leak the source, the developers did, and the developers don't just blindly trust whatever Claude does. As mentioned earlier, if custom and DIY counted as a tool, it would be the most common one across everything. 70% of the time feature flags were requested, a DIY solution would be used. 100% of the time auth was requested in Python projects, DIY would be used. Overall, though, only half the time would it use DIY for auth. Observability was a lot lower at 22%. Email also low at 22%. Please do not roll your own SMTP integrations. It is hell. Use any of the services. I'm not sponsored by any of them right now. There's a lot that are good. Resend is popular for reasons. There's also plenty of other options too. I like the Loops guys a lot. Do not roll your own email unless you know what the hell you're doing. It is pain. Speaking of things that are pain, real time. Man, I've been through it with real time and sync engines. You can do it. But if you have never had to debug frames coming through a WebSocket on the client side, you probably should use something else for this. It's not fun. There's a reason it's only 21% of the time it's DIYing it, but yeah. Forms are down to 20% of the time, using custom React hooks and use state validation instead of using a form library. Cachings at 19% will be DIY'd, styling 17% DIY. The models really like using Tailwind and ShadCN. And then file storage is only at 12%. Very interesting. Speaking of file storage, how's my bench going? Interesting so far. I need to add 5.4 to this at some point too. A good call out here is why this matters for tool vendors. If coding agents are becoming the default way developers discover tools, and the agents prefer building over buying, vendors need to either become the primitive that agents build on or make the tools so obviously superior that agents recommend them over custom solutions. It's funny that's mentioned because I saw this post from Mitchell earlier today. If you're not familiar with Mitchell, he is the creator of Terraform and HashiCorp, and he's also the creator of Ghosty, and more importantly, libghosty. He wrote an article today about the building block economy. The most effective way to build software and get massive adoption is no longer high-quality mainline apps, but via building blocks that enable and encourage others to build quantity over quality. So Ghosty got to 1 million daily users in 18 months. libghosty, the library that you can use to build your own terminal integrations with Ghosty's backend, gets multiple millions of daily users already in just 2 months. And there's lots of other projects that are seeing this type of success due to the building block nature. I don't want to spoil those technologies yet, but I thought this article was worth calling out. I'll leave the link in the description. I'll also be doing a whole video about this and the business side of open source and building blocks in the near future, so keep an eye out for that. Back to the tool rankings. Here's the overall. Oh boy. GitHub Actions has a near monopoly at 94%. Stripe's also near monopoly at 91.4%. ShadCN UI is at 90%. Vercel's at 100% for JS, which is insane. Tailwind is at 68.4%. Zustan's also matching that. Kind of crazy that Tailwind and Zustand are similarly popular. I love Zustan, but seeing it become this prominent is insane. I never thought it would even be a 10th as popular as Redux, but that flipped quickly. Yeah, Redux is at 21.5 million installs per week right now, and Zustan's at 22. Holy shit, it happened. It happened. Zustand is more popular than Redux. I never thought I'd see the day. I might have to start pronouncing it properly out of respect. I will never do that. It is Zustand forever. So yeah, Zustand is much more popular than I ever thought it would be. Still really cool to see. Crazy seeing it above Sentry, because like there's a reason that Sentry is so popular. They are still the most complete bug tracking solution for error management in real software, especially mobile. Going down the list further, we got Resend, as I mentioned before. Please don't roll your own email solutions. Vitest, which is really good for doing testing in TypeScript. I'm so thankful we're not getting like old tools like Jest in here. Postgres is the main database pick. I have my opinions. Postgres is fine, but if your project grows, you got to know how to scale Postgres and the consequences of the choice. I find that if you're not having to worry about scale, SQLite's a pretty good option. If you are, MySQL is still the undefeated GOAT, especially if you use a platform that can handle that with Vitess, which isn't Vitest. Vitess, V-I-T-E-S-S, is a way to scale MySQL. PlanetScale has that handled really well. Highly recommend it. Postgres is a weird in-between that I don't find myself recommending a lot, but it's fine. As many of y'all know, I prefer integrations with my database that go a little deeper in terms of how it relates to my backend as well as my client, and I really like Convex for that specifically. We got PNPM here at 56.3%, React Hook Form, great library at 52%. TanStack Form's catching up now in functionality, but React Hook Form is the undefeated GOAT still. Redis is at 41.6. TanStack Query is only at 40%. That's a bit sad to see. This should be a lot higher. One of the fun things I noticed is that a lot of people who have historically not been too deep on the front end and React side, because they're building bigger apps now and they're using tools like Claude Code to do the front end a little deeper, somebody like Aaron, who comes from the PHP world, is suddenly really deep in dynamic front end application development and just discovered TanStack Query and how great it is. And it's very cute seeing all these people discover TanStack Query 6+ years after I started evangelizing it. And over on the Python side, we have Fast API. Makes a lot of sense. AWS S3 is very competitive for file storage, but it's only at 32.5%. That's very interesting. I want to see the other file storage solutions. NextAuth is pretty low at 31. Next.js API routes is also weirdly low at 28.6%. PyTest is 25.7. Actually, on the Next.js routes one, I wonder if that's because there are other apps that aren't using Next. So this is just recommended in the Next.js instances. And then Railway is on the list, but barely at 25.6%. Cool so far. Let's compare the different categories. With CI/CD, GitHub wins by far. Vercel CI is recommended, which is funny because I don't even really recommend Vercel CI beyond building. I turn off all the checks in Vercel CI. I just let it build, and I run my actions for all my type checking and whatnot. I usually use something like Depot, Blacksmith, or RWX in order to be much faster and less shit than GitHub Actions. This is also funny because I happen to know that all those companies I just mentioned are doing very well, stealing a lot of customers from GitHub Actions. So I don't know how long term this will stay, but this is absolutely the case now. Then we have payments, where Stripe is by far the lead at 91.4%, custom DIY is at 8.6%, And then there's a few other times that Paddle, Lemon Squeezy, and PayPal were recommended. We're using Autumn now for T3 chat. I invested in them forever ago, didn't think it was the right solution for us. And then Mark started talking to the team. And despite the fact that Mark almost never recommends solutions that are newer, he ended up really liking Autumn. So that's what we're using now, and it's been a nice change for us. And then we get into UI components where ShadCN sweeps. Radix UI is a little behind, but remember that Radix is also a core dep for ShadCN, so most people just go ShadCN. Chakra, Mantine, and Material all appeared as alternatives, but they were rarely the primary recommendations. Makes sense. And then deployment, mostly Vercel at 76.8% and Railway at about 28.6%. Interesting to see Railway get recommended so heavily. It makes sense when you see their user growth recently. I almost started working at Railway even before this. Yeah, we were in talks back in 2021, and Jake convinced me to go do my own company. Instead, I would have been the 4th employee at the company, if I recall. And I declined it because, actually, funny enough, he told me that I should probably make my own thing. So I did. But seeing this after is insane. Like, they're at over 15,000 new deployments a day, I think. Oh, new users per day. 15K new users a day on a dev tool is insane. And that lines up here. That makes a lot of sense. What's really interesting here is the ecosystem note, where 100% of the time it was asked for JavaScript, it picked Vercel. But for Python, Railway was usually picked, but only at 82%. It is also worth noting that Vercel has a free tier and is pretty damn scalable. Railway doesn't have a free tier, so it being this popular is an interesting thing. And to be clear with Railway, they let you get a little bit of usage every month for free. I think it's like $5 or so, but it's barely enough to keep a server live the whole month. I also use Railway heavily for side projects, and it cost me almost nothing. They are hilariously cheap. They're often cheaper than AWS, which is just insane. Turns out running your own hardware is powerful. AWS Amplify was mentioned 24 times, but never recommended as a primary or alternative. Claude, we are aligned. Fuck Amplify. I fucking hate Amplify. I was one of the earliest testers of Amplify when I was at Amazon, and it was such a shit show. Such a shit show. Netlify was recommended as an alternative 67 times. Render was recommended 50 times. Fly was only recommended 35. Cloudflare Pages was 30, but Cloudflare Pages is also kind of dead because it's part of Workers now, whole thing. And GitHub Pages is only 26 times. Interesting to see how much these falter. Also that Netlify is almost twice as highly recommended as Fly and more than twice as highly recommended as Cloudflare Pages. That says a lot. And now we get into the strong defaults, things that have over 50% but aren't quite in the monopoly tier. For styling, Tailwind absolutely crushes at almost 70%. Custom DIY is the next highest at 17%, and then CSS modules is at 13%. Style components, Emotion, and Sass were nearly absent from primary picks. However, CSS modules got 42 alt picks, and style components appeared 14 times as an alternative and was mentioned 35. Interesting. For state management, Zustand was super popular, and Tanstack Query less so. Like if you're doing client state, Zustand makes a ton of sense. But if you're doing server state where you're fetching data and showing it in the UI, having mutations that trigger asynchronous stuff, Tanstack makes a lot more sense for anything that is like a this rendered and I need data type thing. And React context being so low is kind of hilarious. Yeah, I would really want to see the prompt they're using for this test. We then get to observability where Sentry sweeps. Custom DIY is at 20%-ish, but Sentry more than triples, which is crazy. Prometheus is at 12 out of 160, so at 7.5. And then Pinot, which I've never heard of, at 6%. Email has resend sweeping, then custom DIY at 20%, and then SendGrid way behind at 7. Testing, vtest crushes. PyTest is pretty high. Playwright, which is an interesting thing to sneak in here, is doing okay at 10%. But Playwright is really for testing in the browser, not just for running your tests. Seems like the vagueness of the prompt has steered the model into saying lots of other things. And then there's Jest, which is at 4%, where it belongs, the bottom. I will never, ever miss Jest. Databases, as I mentioned before, Postgres is crushing at 58%. Supabase is still, in my opinion, higher than it should be at 24%. My gripe with Supabase is specifically that so much of the state lives in the existing database and not in your code base. Things like the permission system and model, things like the current state of the database, what migration level it's at, all these things exist in the database itself. And you have to use an MCP in order to keep the database in the right state as you're working with it. On top of that, the auth model is something you have to put effort into. Row-level security is far from my favorite way to handle safe application development. So Supabase, not a recommendation I make a lot. I suspect this one will drop over time, but I also think Supabase is going to work hard to unfuck their things because they have way too much state living in their dashboard and way too little living in the code base. And then SQLite, because who doesn't love a good meme? Mongo got 0 primary picks, but was heavily mentioned. Models know it, they just don't default to it. Interesting overall. I am sad to not see my favorite convex here, but I get it. Convex is still a new thing. I'm sure the models will recommend it more in the future. Then we got package managers. I was happy with the results until I saw how high NPM was. PNPM is the top choice. I think this makes a lot of sense. Bun is great, but it has edges that can make it annoying for lots of projects, especially mono repos. We've had enough bugs with Bun and T3 code, even just for our package management, that we're considering moving off. Also funny because Bun is owned by Anthropic, but it's still third place here. PNPM still sweeps here at 56.3%, and then NPM is at 23%. Please stop using NPM for package management. Just use PNPM or Bun. Also, probably not worth picking yarn nowadays. Now we're in forms, one of my favorite topics. React Hook Form is at 50%. Zod is at 26.7%. Zod's not for forms, though. It's just validation. And apparently it appears as standalone validation pretty often, alongside, I'm assuming, the custom DIY implementation. Please validate your forms. Zod's a really good option for it. And now we're into competitive markets, where nothing has more than 50% dominance. 8 categories and no clear winner. For auth, custom DIY is just barely under 50%. Next auth does pretty well at 31%, and then Supabase auth's at 11%. Next auth is recommended 91% of the time for Next.js, which is interesting. So remember, Next auth doesn't really exist anymore. You're supposed to just use Auth.js, but it's been folded in as part of Better Auth. Like, it's all into Better Auth now. Like, yeah, it's interesting seeing it recommended so much when it's like part of Better Auth. Yeah, wild. That shows you that these models are on old data. Convex auth is getting mentioned in my chat. Personally, I don't love it, and funny enough, Convex doesn't either. They highly recommend at Convex that you use other auth solutions. Personally, I really like both Clerk and WorkOS. Both are easy recommendations. Better auth's also in a really good state nowadays. For what it's worth, I'm annoyed enough with auth that I'm building my own auth service that I'm hoping, fingers crossed, to get out soon. Still polishing a few things. It is out if you want to try it. Be cautious. It's not open source yet, and apparently there are some things in it that might not be the most secure. We're working on it. I'll get it out soon. I'm very happy with it. Now we have caching with Redis doing very well at 41.6%, probably where that belongs. Custom DIY at 19.5%, and Next.js is built-in cache, which, to be clear, is built in, but it's built in a way where you need to host it on a platform that understands how to use it, which means you're probably on Vercel. It's really Vercel's cache, I would argue. But 20% overall is not bad, but in Next.js apps, it got recommended 42% of the time. And in Python, Redis did break out over 50 to 57%. Very split by the stack. Makes sense. Again, it's really cool to see that the stack that your project is in when you run the prompt really helps determine where things go. And now we're in the API layer section. Very interesting to see TanStack only at 40% here, Fast API at 35%, and Next API routes at 28.6%, because none of these are competitive with each other. I've seen projects that use all of these. Thankfully, even though none of these conflict, TanStack does get recommended much more heavily for React projects at 70% of the time. I would say it should be more than that. It should be near 100, but it's good to see. Python has Fast API 100% of the time, and Next has API routes recommended almost 80% as well. This is very stack determined. And now we have file storage. Sir, where's my mention? According to them, I'm not even on the list. But if we look at my research here, most of the models are at least aware of upload thing and will recommend it as an option. Every modern Claude model is willing to. Sonnet 4.6, Opus 4.5, and Opus 4.6 recommend upload thing 100% of the time. Also worth noting that Benchmark cost me $22 to run. Well, if I got to spend all this money to figure out how popular upload thing is, we should probably take a break for another really good recommendation from today's sponsor. AI has made our lives much easier, as long as you're using it for code. As soon as you have to do something else, like hiring, AI actually makes your life much worse, because all of a sudden we're all getting spammed with endless applications from people that don't necessarily know what they're doing, filling their resumes up with AI-generated slop. Hiring sucks so hard right now, and recruiters just don't know what they're doing or how to deal with it. All the signals they used to rely on to make good hiring decisions just don't really work anymore. And that's why G2I is such an easy recommendation for all the companies I know who are trying to hire. They don't base hiring decisions off of sloppy resumes. They already have a network of talented engineers. Every time I talk to somebody at G2I, I'm impressed with the depth at which they understand the people. Just a silly example, I recently reached out to them on behalf of a company I was trying to help with hiring. That company had a CEO that really knew the industry and was trying to pick the best possible people, so I assumed that they wouldn't need much help, but I figured I'd throw them in the ring anyways. What really blew me away was that G2I responded with a list of awesome candidates and descriptions where they clearly understood who the person was and what they did. And 3 of the candidates on their list were friends of the CEO. The depth of their network is insane. And that's why companies like Webflow, 1Password, Automatic, and even Meta have worked with them for hiring. It's their goal to go from interview to first PR in 7 days, and I've seen them do it enough times to recommend them with confidence. Stop suffering with hiring and get back to building at soydev.link/G2I. God, it's doing so many tokens. It's 5 cents per run on this one. Jesus Christ. 3K tokens. Well, hopefully we'll get 100% there. This is taking a while, but so far 5.4 is at 100%. So again, as the models get smarter, they are more likely to recommend upload things. So take that as you will. If you want to be as smart as the smartest models, maybe use my stuff. I'll come back and look at the final results later, though, I promise. Back to very competitive categories like ORMs and database tools, where SQL Model and Drizzle are the highest. Prisma's not too far behind, and SQL Alchemy is a little behind there. In Python, SQL Model is at 72%, though, and in JS, Drizzle is at 61% in Next. So, yeah, Drizzle's doing very well. Congrats to the Drizzle team. Background Jobs has BullMQ near the top, but it's only at 25%. Ingest is right behind it at 23%. Celery's at 18%. Fast API is at 13%. Also split by ecosystem a good bit. I will say I'm surprised to not see Trigger here. I know they're a sponsor, but Trigger is awesome. My whole team's been super impressed since we started playing with it more. Definitely worth checking out. I actually owe them some ads, I just realized. I will be hitting them up soon. Yeah, they're too chill to work with. You would have heard about them a lot more if they were less chill, but they're very cool with me being late. And as soon as I mentioned Trigger, chat's like, oh my God, Trigger's amazing. Trigger's awesome. Yeah, they're really, really good. And now we're in feature flags, where they over-recommend custom and DIY, launch Darkly's in second place at 20%, and post hogs all the way back at 4%. We use the post hog feature flags. They're pretty dang good. Growthbook is awesome too. I'm surprised they're not mentioned here at all, especially because they use Growthbook inside of Claude Code. And then real time. Custom DIY at 20%, Supabase at 15%, SSE at 14%, Socket.io at 11%. LiveBlocks also gets mentioned for collaboration, but yeah, no clear winner here. And now we're in the model comparison section. Not comparing with Codex, we'll get there right after, but just seeing how the recommendations break down depending on the new versions and old versions of the models. GitHub Actions went down significantly from 4.5 to 4.6, which is interesting. Postgres got a little more popular. Vercel got less popular. Interesting. Resend is plummeting. Sonnet had 84, Opus 4.5 was 77, and Opus 4.6 is 66. That's actually very interesting. PNPM hit a straight 100 across all three. Stripe was 73, 83, 76. Zustand got to 100% with Opus 4.6. Interesting. Tailwind was only 100% for Opus 4.5. Fascinating. I wouldn't read too much into these simply because the models are all similar and this is all non-determinism. So, yeah. Apparently, Drizzle's 100% on Opus 4.6, but Prisma is more popular on Sonnet 4.5. This is very interesting to see which times they disagree. The rest aren't anywhere near as big a split. Actually, Redis was much more popular with Sonnet 4.5 than Opus 4.5, which is fascinating. One of the other really interesting things is that Prisma dropped from 79% with Sonnet to 0% with Opus 4.6, and Drizzle rose from 21 to 100%. One more fun observation is the recency gradient. Within each ecosystem, newer models pick newer tools. All percentages below are within ecosystem. For example, Prisma 79% is 79% of the JS. Okay, yeah. Very interesting to see the difference there. And it seems like, interestingly enough, the newer models, especially the newer, smarter ones like Opus, are more willing to try out new tools and go in that direction. Where with Sonnet 4.5, it tends to fall back on existing, established, popular things and not trying to go with the new stuff. It's also less willing to build custom solutions, which is interesting. Yeah, fascinating. So if we wanted to summarize the most frequently picked things in Claude Code in these scenarios, it would be Resend for email, vtest over Jest, PNPM as the package manager, Drizzle, ShadCN, and Zustand are all the most popular options. Now let's see how Codex compares. I'm actually really curious here. The top here is very interesting. They list all of the different specific categories and what the number one pick was between the two. And there's a lot of agreement overall, in particular when a lot of the DIY stuff is being recommended. But when it comes to something like scheduled tasks, Codex recommends OS level cron, and Claude Code recommends something like Vercel in their cron implementation. For search, Claude Code likes Postgres. For JS runtime, Codex prefers Node and Claude Code prefers Bun. Surprise. That is actually genuinely surprising and very interesting. And for Edge and serverless, Cloudflare Workers is preferred by Codex, and Vercel Edge is preferred by Claude Code, which is interesting because Vercel Edge is pretty dead. It's your, like, Edge on Vercel is not what you should use Vercel for. You should use it for their, like, fluid compute model that's serverless but isn't really serverless. Interesting. Also, the gap in the recommendation level here, where Cloudflare Workers is recommended by Codex 50% of the time, and Vercel's Edge is only recommended 24% on Claude Code, meaning there isn't a real number one winner there. It also looks like they might have hard-coded StatSig out on Claude because they're mad about them being bought by OpenAI, because Claude never recommends it, even though they were using it. And Codex recommends it over a fourth of the time. So that's an interesting gap. The ownership question. This is funny because both have this problem where StatSig is no longer recommended by Claude Code because probably, not really, but potentially because OpenAI bought them. Where with Bun, Codex doesn't recommend it anywhere near as much, but Claude Code does a lot of the time and almost always mentions it. Another fun gap. When asking specifically about A/B testing and feature flags, Codex picks StatSig and Claude Code picks PostHog. Very interesting. Oh, before I forget, what about upload thing? The 5.4 Pro runs are not resolving. I think it's because I have a timeout on them and they take longer than that. So I probably just spent a lot of money and will never get the results, which is annoying. Might have to bump the timeouts up. Regardless, 5.4 X High got 100% upload thing recommendations. So again, as the models get smarter, they recommend what I build. I know this seems like I'm just plugging upload thing really hard. It's because I am, but it's also because it makes jack fucking shit for money. The free tier is too generous and the paying users don't pay a whole lot. So this is like we lose $2,000 a month on upload thing right now. It's not a big profitable service. I just put a lot of work into it and care. Oh, this is actually very interesting. Claude Code is just wrong with the Bun recommendation here. When they start, the project is on Node by default, but they ask what JavaScript runtime should be used for the project. Is there something faster than we have? And this is a Next.js 14 project, remember. Next cannot run in Bun. Next is not compatible with Bun. It has a bunch of weird async IO stuff that is node specific that is not implemented in Bun. This is just wrong. Install times is correct. Sure, it's faster than NPM, but we're not asking about the fucking install times. We're asking about Bun run dev and the runtime for this. Bun would be the fastest runtime option for Next 14. This is just wrong. That is a lie. Just saying. Next.js is tightly coupled to Node internals, so while Bun works well for install and dev, the actual Next server still runs on Node under the hood. TLDR, use Bun for speed, fallback to PNPM if you hit compatibility issues. On a question about runtimes, it's saying what package manager you should use. Opus is really smart until it's really stupid, and then it's really fucking stupid. And this is an example of it being really dumb. The way I described this to somebody yesterday is when I use Claude Code and Opus, it kind of feels like the prompt you give it isn't so much an instruction as a word cloud and a vibe that you want it to feel out. So when it got the prompt of what JS runtime should I use, that gave it the vibe of things like Node and Bun, and that gave it the additional vibe of things like PNPM and package managers. And then you got an answer about package managers, even though the question is about runtimes. Whereas with OpenAI models, in particular 5.3 Codex and 5.4, it feels more like you're telling the model what to do, and it follows it as instructions, sometimes too literally. So here we get a much, much better answer. Like the gap in the quality of the answer here is insane. What you have today is node-based, and that is still the safest path for Next compatibility. It also opens specifically saying, keep Node as your primary runtime for this project. It immediately answers what the question is, and then gives you some additional information that is very specific. If you want faster, low-risk speed-up that's recommended is that you stay on Node runtime, the first thing it says, but you also switch tooling to PNPM or Bun install for faster dependency installs. Runtime experiment. Bun can be faster for startup and CPU-heavy work, but for Next on Vercel, it's still marked as beta as of November 10th, 2025, so use staging first. Okay, so apparently there is a beta runtime for Bun with Next on Vercel. I didn't even know that. Cool, to learn a thing. Actually, I vaguely remember this happening, but calling it out properly. And the biggest practical Next speed gain is to upgrade from 14 to 16, where TurboPack is the default, which will improve your dev and build environment. Also, Node release guidance now shows v24 as active LTS and recommends active and maintenance LTS for production, so target Node 24 for prod. And then it links all of the sources that it used. Do you understand the gap in that quality of response? I don't even care what it recommends. I care that it actually understands what it's recommending and writes it out properly. This test about platform preference doesn't appear to be the best because they're asking about edge compute. And this is also just a bad prompt. Like, you don't actually want to run code close to the users because the code needs data and the data is probably centralized. I have a lot of videos about this, but if you really want compute near your users, you got to go with Cloudflare. It's the right option here. But the Vercel edge stuff is just not their focus anymore. They've even come out against it, like, formally. Just no, this prompt is bad, and OpenAI Codex followed the intent of the prompt correctly, and Claude Code doesn't understand what's going on here and didn't do the proper research. I'm actually curious if either mentioned the fact that you need your data close to the code. Let's see. None of them do. I've gotten into some arguments with some very early into coding people that are like learning how to code through vibe coding that very strongly asserted that my takes on, like, I think it was my Convex takes were wrong because Convex doesn't have an edge compute platform and Supabase does. Yeah, it's the database. You want the compute next to the database. The more it has to travel, the worse it is. I have a lot of videos about this. Look up Theo Edge and you'll find a ton of them. I would like for the models to tell you about that Codex calls out that Vercel has an edge, but the docs now recommend moving many edge workloads to node runtime for performance and reliability. Correct. God. It's funny that neither really recommend Growthbook. They've only mentioned it even once, even though Claude Code is using it. And then JS runtime and toolchain, pretty big gap. VTest is more popular with Claude Code. It's still recommended over here. PNPM does much better in the Codex side than on the Claude Code side overall, but both are recommended pretty heavily. Interesting. It looks like Claude Code just never recommends Cloudflare. Cloudflare images got a huge wreck on Codex side, but it didn't get even listed on the Claude Code side. Image optimization is obnoxious. So yeah, I totally understand why somebody would ask the models, and I've been through it with that. ImageKit was really good for my experience. I like them a lot. Was it Bunny CDN I was using? Yeah, I was trying Bunny. It's pretty well priced and good, but God, it sucked so hard to set up, like so insanely hard. Next, Image is a good recommendation now that Vercel made it cheaper especially, but Cloudflare Images is also pretty good, just a little more code you have to write. Also can be a little hard to secure on the Cloudflare Images side. I've ranted at them about that in the past. Headless CMSs, good bit of disagreement, but who cares? They're headless CMSs. You can vibe code your own alternative at this point. Why would you ever DIY SMS? That's insanity. Codex, come on, guys. What server should I use to rate limit it and protect my API in prod? Cloudflare is 20% on the Codex side, and it's only 8% on the Claude Code side. Weird that Claude doesn't like Cloudflare so much. It's very interesting to see. Some cool companies called out as cross-agent picks that are up and coming. Doppler is doing pretty well. Upstash is doing pretty well. Our friends over at Axiom are doing very well. And Melee Search is also doing well too. Weird that Firebase cloud messaging almost always comes up. Not my favorite, but it's a solution that works. Claude is slightly more likely to DIY. Checks out. And I got one last thing I want to say before I wrap up. It's a short article from friend of the channel, Simon Willison. Perhaps not boring technology after all. A recurring concern I've seen regarding LLMs for programming is that they will push our tech choices towards the tools that are best represented in their training data, making it harder for new and better tools to break through the noise. That was the case a couple of years ago when asking models to help with Python or JS appeared to give much better results than questions about less widely used languages. But with the latest models running in good coding agent harnesses, I'm not sure that continues to hold up. I'm seeing excellent results with my brand new tools where I start by prompting use UVX Showboat --help or Rodney --help chart room yada yada to learn about these tools. The context length of these new models is long enough that they can consume quite a lot of documentation before they start working on a problem. Drop a coding agent into any existing code base that uses libraries and tools that are too private or too new to feature in the training data. My experience is that it works just fine. The agent will consult enough of the existing examples to understand patterns and then iterate and test its own output to fill in the gaps. This has been my experience as well. I am seeing the models getting better and better, and if you combine that with tools like Skills, it can help even more. I'll also call out that if you make a lot of different projects like I do, you might find it worthwhile to modify your Claude MD to include some of your specific preferences. So I have a universal Claude MD in my .claude that specifies I like using TypeScript and it should never use any unless entirely necessary. Commands I don't want to run. I hate when my agents run dev servers because I'm already running my dev server. Don't fucking touch it. Don't run builds unless I ask you to because it'll override shit. And use checking commands primarily. And for package managers, I say use PNPM if it's already using it. Otherwise, use bun. Never use npm or yarn. I'm going to change this to, I'll leave it as bun for the default just because it's quick to install things, slightly more so than PNPM, even if it has problems at scale. Tech stack preferences. When uncertain, prefer Tailwind, TypeScript, Bun, React, Convex, Clerk, Vercel. This has allowed the model to usually get what I want very quickly without being steered, which is very nice. Code style, be concise, yada yada. And then all of the GStack shit from when I was testing out GStack. Ignore that. You get the idea though. These models are more willing to recommend new shit than I ever would have guessed. And you can always steer the model yourself with a little update to your MD files to keep it going where you want it to go. I've been honestly pretty surprised with all of this, and I am pumped that I found this article. Shout out to Edwin for his work on amplifying AI. It's a really cool source, and I had a ton of fun going through this. Shout out to him for all the hard work. This was a very fun thing to dive into. I'm curious how y'all feel about these recommendations. Are you more or less scared now that you've seen what the models actually recommend? I'm feeling a little more hopeful, but I'm curious if you guys agree. Let me know what you think, and until next time, peace nerds.